The part every pilot likes, the peak experience, is the takeoff. We're leaving in a 20th century travel mode to go visit the 19th century. The Central Pacific Railroad and the 40-mile desert over to our west. Chasing our shadow across the ground. The light is behind us, so this is the best later in the day to go from south to north on the 40-mile desert. There go the numbers. A quick look of what we're doing. We're going to fly over Fernley, Nevada, and we're going to turn at a place called Promontory Turn, and then we're going to follow Interstate 80 from there down to Desert Station, Hot Springs Station, Mirage, over Hot Springs Grade, down to White Plain, across Humboldt Bar to Brown, a few miles up north to Brown, and then we're going to turn around at Brown and come back over the Humboldt Bar for a look there. The current railroad that replaced the old Central Pacific in 1902 starts at Fernley and goes over to Hazen and goes up the other 40-mile desert and meets at Brown, where the new connection was made. Coming in, facing west, on the edge of the 40-mile desert, over Fernley, Nevada. The first 5 miles of the 40-mile desert goes over from the Truckee River at Wadsworth across this area between the green dots. Follow the bouncing ball. They show where the old Central Pacific grade is. The bouncing ball is bouncing because of all the turbulence flying at this low altitude next to mountains. So we'll see plenty of bouncing. The old Central Pacific grade crosses Interstate 80 right at this point and goes over to the other side. A lot of it's not really visible from the ground. You never know what you're looking at, but you can see it from the air due to the geometry of railroads. The grades are clear. It swung over there and dropped down off of this sandy plateau in that white area. Now we see the Central Pacific going straight down, back down towards Interstate 80. Here the railroad swings down, and much of the lower lane of Interstate 80, the eastern lane, is right over the old railroad grade. We'll be coming up on Desert Station. There it is right there. And then that line below is the old wagon road over to Hazen and Fallon. Looking over the front, flying north over that same place, we start to see the 40-mile desert. This is not a picturesque place. This is really the real Death Valley, in the sense that there were thousands of pioneers who died here. They say there's one grave for every mile of the Immigrant Trail, and there's probably even more in the 40-mile desert area. What we're looking at is an old lake bed that started drying up about 12,000 years ago. There once was an inland sea the size of France over this part of Nevada, and only 5 degrees cooler in mean temperature. So what you're looking at is climate change in reverse. Several 100,000 people crossed here during the 1840s to the 1860s. Now the freeway splits ahead as we start approaching Hot Springs grade. Hot Springs grade was the main reason that the original route of the Central Pacific was abandoned in 1902, because there was about a little over a 400-foot rise in just a few miles, and so it was quite a trip for the little engines they had then. So the Central Pacific had to maintain a helper district from Wadsworth way out to White Plains, 35 miles away. So extra engines had to be dispatched over the 70-mile round trip. Over on the right you can see shorelines from ancient Lake Lahontan. Some of those were islands, it looks like, bays. Just a few degrees of global cooling. One geological report said there was only 5 degrees less in the annual mean temperature. Just a few degrees, but what if your body temperature went up just a few degrees? You wouldn't feel so good. We're approaching Brady's Hot Springs, what the pioneers used to call boiling springs. For 40 miles here, there are thin places in the Earth's crust, faults that just follow this valley. Today, the hot springs are being used for generating geothermal power and also processing onions. We're coming up on the site of Hot Springs Station, right there where the ball is. It's approximately between the lane splits on Interstate 80. Hot Springs was an important station midway on the 40-mile desert. It had a 24-hour telegraph service. What a lonely outpost for a telegrapher. But they often communicated among themselves on the 19th century's version of the internet. We're coming up on the site of Leet. Leet was founded by Benjamin Franklin Leet, who was an original surveyor on the railroad, who came back later to develop the salt springs that he found out on the flats. They were like 30% salt. The salt was very important for the reduction process in the Comstock mines and other mines. That dot there is where the spur came off of the Central Pacific and went out to his operation on the flats. Later, the railroad, after this was abandoned, Leet built tracks all the way back to the to Fernley, current Fernley, and for a short while operated a railroad just for the purpose of salt. Here the Central Pacific grade veers off between the lanes right there on its way to Hot Springs Station, which comes up shortly ahead. Between the lanes we start to see the old Central Pacific roadbed departing, turning, and sort of going right between them there. Hot Springs Station is between the lanes just this side of the overpass, off and on ramps. Right about there. Below us is old Highway 40. Okay, hold on to your lunch. We're going to make a bank over here to the left a bit. It's Fireball Ridge, where 1908 a meteor landed. Now the railroad took off across the flat. Above there, there's a faint trace right there where the ball is. After leaving Hot Springs Station, the next station up was Mirage, up just over the summit. See traces of the railroad from the air. You'd never know what you're looking at on the ground. I've been back and forth on this for several years, locating these places. Old Highway 40. Now it's a frontage road that goes to the Brady's Hot Springs and the other plants here. There's a lot of diatomaceous earth in this area, quite a bit of digging. There's the diatomaceous earth plant. It was about a 400 and little over 400 foot climb up this grade. They were going 20 miles an hour on a good day, I'm sure. A little past here, Mirage should be coming up. Right about there. It's a hard one to find. This is just over the top of the summit. And then from here the roadbed kind of comes down and crosses the freeway. Coming up in the area called the Pass, the California Trail, that serpentine canyon you see down there was their way to get off of the northern end of the 40-mile desert. The 40-mile desert on the Truckee route, the one we're following here, is really divided by the Hot Springs Mountains. So there's, on each side of here is the 40-mile desert continues. Been down there, that's a real sandy wash. Must have been hard to get those wagons up there. A lot of fossils right in this area right here. In fact, school tours come out here to see these fossils. Now a view ahead overlooking Hot Springs. We're right above Hot Springs right now. From here we can start to see the summit and also the other side of the 40-mile desert where it starts dropping off. Ragged Top Mountain, an old caldera. The Mokpung Hills are in the famous Hart photograph of 1868 called Chinese Camp. So that's kind of a landmark on the Central Pacific. Those white deposits that are all over this area are diatomaceous earth. They're much older than Pleistocene Lake Lahontan. They're from the Miocene, the Jurassic. They're contemporaneous with the ichthyosaur in the age of dinosaurs, really. That Ragged Top Mountain is, when you see it from other views, especially from the ground, it's pretty dramatic, and it's a caldera, which is a huge area that it looks like it blew up. It's all kind of pinnacles on the horizon. The 40-mile desert is not beautiful or charismatic landscape in the conventional sense. It's not on any Nevada brochures, but it's very, very fierce and forbidding. But I've spent most of my life around here, and I kind of like it. It's just mysterious. Early pioneer accounts of the area use the words like hell or Dante's Inferno. And the very term 40 was biblical numerology for the God-fearing folks who came across here with their Bibles. The station we just passed, Mirage, got its name from you could actually see mirages out there in the heat, like you would in North Africa, across the White Plains down there. One of the reasons that the military trains here is that this great desert looks like the other great deserts of the world, particularly the Middle East. Nevada is a military playground from north to south. In the 50s, I used to go out with my father to watch the atomic tests outside of Las Vegas. I have been told by people that were living up here in the 50s that they could see the flash on the horizon all the way down 400 miles to the Las Vegas area, to the Nevada test site. Those were only 12 megaton bombs, just little ones. They were just really primers for the hydrogen bombs that they were testing in the Pacific at the time. The little primer bombs were about the size of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombs dropped on Japan. Somehow we survived. Will we survive climate chaos? Now I'm going to cut the power and start gliding down towards White Plains. From here, where the dots are, you see the roadbed. more salt works on this side. They drilled all kinds of wells here, and they could not find any usable water for drinking or steam engines. So water had to be hauled all the way out here from Wadsworth. You don't need power to fly. You can just glide. Out of the side. There's the Y there where they turned around the engines, and right next to it, all over, there's still signs of the old station there. A lot of coal and slag dumped all over the place. It must have cleaned out engines while they were waiting to turn around and pull the next train back up to Wadsworth. These kind of playas were, when they were dry, were quite good for crossing for the pioneers and for people today. But when they were wet, they were treacherous quagmires. I've been stuck out of here in four-wheel drive. You can just get stucker. That's the advantage of four-wheel drive. The Central Pacific seems rather serpentine here, but actually it's following the contours to maintain the best grade they can. We have to remember that this was all done by hand. There was no machinery. 10,000 Chinese with some horses and dirt carts and shovels. That was about it. It wasn't until the turn of the 19th century that we started getting power equipment like steam shovels and early steam tractors like the Holt and the Best. But until then, it was still animal and human power, which makes this even more incredible when you think of the amazing human labor that went into this project. The 40-mile desert history of strange events and deaths continues to the present time. In the 60s, the proprietors of the truck stop here at Trinity Junction were murdered. Later, they had trucks burn up, fuel trucks, and then the station finally burned down. In 1993, there was a robbery here, and the state trooper who apprehended the thief was murdered by that thief, Trooper Carlos Borland. Then in 2011, a strange accident happened 3 miles from here when an Amtrak train collided with a truck, killing 6 people. Just passing over White Plains Station. The Central Pacific Railroad you can see curving up over on the left, and then it hit the side of and crawled up that side of the Humboldt Bar, or Humboldt Dike as they called it. Sometimes they said the dike. This feature is about 100-foot high gravel bar that was left over from a lower stage of the Pleistocene Lake Lahontan, and it separates the two drainages, the Carson River drainage, which we're over right now, from the Humboldt River drainage on the other side of the bar. The Humboldt got the pioneers across the state for about 350 miles, and then they had to stop there. At the top of this feature was a station called Rockby, Looks like they had a spur there too. There's some evidence of a station. I also found some pieces that suggested that a locomotive blew up there, which was not uncommon going up a hill. Trinity Junction on the left. We're crossing the highway there. Over on the right where it meets the Union Pacific Railroad is where the Amtrak train hit in that freak accident where a trucker just drove right through the guarded crossing with the gates down and everything. Gonna cut the power right here and just glide towards the bar. You can start to see kind of the cut there. It goes from left to right and then it curls around that peninsular feature there. Over on the left you can see the two lanes of the Interstate 80. On the right, the straight line is the 1903 Harriman realignment of the Southern Pacific Railroad when they had power equipment like steam shovels and steam tractors. In 1868, when it had to be done by hand, they did what you see on the left. Over the nose, the Humboldt sink, the end of the Humboldt River is starting to appear. This area was what the pioneers called Big Meadows. They spent a couple of weeks here resting and gathering grass and water in order to make the run for the 40-mile desert behind us to the Truckee River, 40 miles away, the next water. This was a big, dry gap. Just over Humboldt Bar, we're gliding down towards the site of Brown. Later it was called Toy. It was also called Brown's in pioneer days. It was an important site because there were springs here and water coming out. It wasn't great water, but it was usable. On the left down there is a train coming out of Lovelock. A little above the nose on the right is a famous location called Granite Point, where the famous photographer Hart took one of the historic photos of the Central Pacific. That little patch just left of the nose is the location of Brown. About 4 miles past the bar. Approaching the Humboldt Dike from the south. You see the Central Pacific roadbed curving up along to climb it on the flanks. Right here was a place called Rockby. Looks like, well, there was a spur, possibly a Y there. It was a station with a platform, telegraph. Looked at it on the ground. Now it's over the dike, going downhill towards Brown. The current Union Pacific Railroad is coming into view below us. Next to this ghost called the Central Pacific. I'm going to bend over here a little bit so we can get the camera in better. We're flying next to the Trinity Range, south of Lovelock. Faint roadbed going down. This is a very rough ride. I did it in a two-wheel drive, but I probably wished I would have had a four-wheel drive in one place. Here comes a train hauling more containers for stuff from China. Ironically, the first load across the Central Pacific in the summer of 1869 was tea and silk from China, and that was one of the motives they had. Besides getting to California, they often talked about the China trade. Well, we're still doing it. Brown is coming up. The California Trail on this side had to hug the drier ground, and Brown was basically the last stop for water. There was an old trading post here before the railroad. You can see some water down there right now. Fairly extensive railroad site here for many years after, evidence of it on the ground. Turning to the east, over there is the site of Toulon. There was a mill there where tungsten was milled there during the First World War and the Second World War. They got a lot of tungsten out of the hills back there. Lovelock is really out of sight from here. It's over that rise. Now the Humboldt Range is coming into sight. Right across the valley over there is the Lovelock Indian Caves, an international site really that goes back to 11,000 years of when there were people living here, when there was more of an inland sea here. Across the mountains over there is a Carson Sink. That's a 25-mile wide area over to the Stillwater Range. Coming back around 180 degrees, now we're heading south back over the same area of the Humboldt Dike. Central Pacific is faintly visible down there. Coming up on that same train that's going through the cut. It's around a 50-foot cut through that dike. Everything is flattened out from the air. Until you're on the ground walking up it, you don't realize. Central Pacific curving around to the bottom right corner of our frame, heading towards White Plains Station. The train's heading out on the Carson route of the 40-mile desert. There's two 40-mile deserts separated by the Hot Springs Mountains. The Truckee route is the one that the Donners took to their tragedy on Donner Pass. The Carson route went up to the Carson River near present-day Fallon, Nevada. From there they went to Carson City and basically followed the Carson River all the way up to Wadsworth, California, where they crossed the Sierra at Carson Pass or Johnson Pass. This became the favored route, especially after the news of the Donner Party of 1846, where nearly half of the 81-person party died in the snows near the summit of the Sierra. But either route across the 40-mile desert was the most dangerous stretch. After 2,000 miles, when they were the weakest, they had to deal with this. Those pioneers were a special breed.